Welcome to another Broken Banners Battle Report, where Kevan Lannister takes on Baelor Blacktyde. Kevan Lannister brings battlefield manipulation to the already control-heavy Lannisters, where Baelor Blacktyde brings retaliation and resilience to the hyper-aggressive Greyjoys.
Hi, I'm Richard. Today I'll be running Baelor Commander in 7-point Ironmakers. Ironmakers, once they get their pillage tokens, they save on 2s. They have crit blow, and if you roll any 1s on defense, you become weakened. What Baelor brings, he's very durable. He has hardened and to the last, so he's got some extra lives on him. And that is a nice 7-point durable package. Next, we have in an 8-point package, we have Dagmar Cleftjaw and 7-point Silenceman. Silencemen, when they have their pillage ability, they have double sundering, and they have a fear aura, and they also have Dauntless. And Dagmar brings battle scars, so the more ranks they lose, the scarier they can become. Next, in a 7-point package, we have Daario Naharis, Blacktyde Chosen. Blacktyde Chosen recently got reworked. They have First Claim, so whenever I claim the bags, they get a pillage token, and once they have 2 pillage tokens, they have an aura that makes my guys a bit braver, gives everyone Iron Resolve basically in short range. They also have Divided Spoils, so they can share the pillage tokens they get. And Daario Naharis, he's a very gambling heavy. He brings crit blow and precision, but for any roll of 1 I get, he takes a wound. And then finally, we have Ironborn Archers with Euron Greyjoy for 5 points total. Ironborn Archers, they have Divided Spoils, and they get rerolls in the flanks. And Euron brings in 2 pillage tokens at the cost of hurting me every time he does something. For NCUs, we have Balon Greyjoy, pretty classic pick. If any unit dies, I can activate him and redeploy it using outflank rules once a game. Next we have 4 points, Asha Greyjoy. She has an influence ability that does a few new things. Whenever she influences, she can remove a condition token. She also increases the morale of a unit based on how many pillage tokens they have. And if they pass the morale check, they can send hits back to any unit that they're engaged with. And then our final NCU, 4 points, is Roderick the Reader. He has 2 order tokens, so twice per game at the start of a turn, I can set aside some cards and draw that many +1 from my deck. Lets me work with my deck a bit better. Okay, that's it.
Hi, my name's Ethod, and I'll be playing Lannister today. Starting off, I'm bringing Sir Gregor the Mountain that Flies. He's a 4-point solo. He's speed 4, throwing 3 dice on 3s, but defenders don't get to roll defense dice, and he is crit blow on the charge. He has intimidating presence, and he's saving on 2/4. Another 4-point unit, I'm bringing Four Fellows. These guys have seen a lot of changes over the years, and this might be one of the first patches in a while that they haven't been touched. They're saving 6/6. They throw a 5/4/4, speed 5, but they've got a faith ability, Fanatical Zeal. Every time they get a faith token, whenever they pass a morale test, and they can spend those faith tokens to either give themselves rerolls and precision on their attack, or to heal 2 wounds whenever they activate. Going on up to the 6-point tier, I've got Lannister Crossbowmen. They're a staple to any Lannister list. Nothing too fancy. They're saving 4/7, long range, throwing 6/6/4 on 3 up. They've got sundering and rerolls when they're shooting something in short range. Simple, but effective. Then I have my next 6-point unit. I have Mountains Men. They're speed 5. They save 4/6 now. They've got Vicious innately, hitting on 4s, throwing 7/5/4, but they also have Prey on Fear, and whenever they're attacking a unit with the same amount of ranks or fewer, they also get crit blow and +1 to hit. So most of the time, they're actually hitting on 3s. Their attachment is the commander of this list, Kevan Lannister. He's got Orders of the Crown, which allows him to make a melee attack or a charge action whenever he claims the crown by replacing that zone's effect, and he has Lannister Supremacy. Finally, what Lannister list would it be without the Knights of Casterly Rock? At 8 points, They're coming in with lance, so they're throwing 6-4, hitting on 3s. They're heavy lance, so they're saving 3-6. When they're charging, they get +2 dice to their attack for each remaining rank they have, and they've got Sunder. On top of that, they also have Lannister Supremacy, which, as mentioned briefly on the unit before, means that whenever a unit attacks them, when the attack is completed, ranged attacks included, they have to take a panic test, which is going to result in a -1 for each rank that unit has, as well as an extra wound for each one. In the NCU suite, I've got Kevan, who has been recently reworked. He has got 3 order tokens, and when an enemy NCU activates, he can remove one of those order tokens to choose 2 zones. If that NCU claims either of those zones, after resolving that zone's effects, target up to 2 enemy combat units and they become vulnerable. Then I've got Tommen Baratheon, who has got 2 order tokens, and when he claims a zone, you can remove an order token, and you can search out from your discard pile or your deck one of 2 cards depending on what zones you control. If you control the crown, you can take out Intrigue and Subterfuge. If you control the bag, you get Bribery. Finally, I have the thrice nerfed Peter Baelish. He's only got 2 order tokens now. He still has his once per game, where at the start of any turn you can select a zone, and you have that zone until the end of the round for all purposes of abilities. And whenever he claims a zone, you can spend an order token to replace its effect with the effect of any unclaimed zone.
We start off with the roll for terrain. Honed and ready castle walls shoot arrows down on the map for the side objectives at the end of the round whenever you score. A terrain restriction is that you can't place impassable terrain, so I put the next best thing, putting stakes between 2 of the flank points. Rich puts down a weirwood tree in the center, and I put a low wall towards one of the other flank, to try and ward off some of his aggressive flanking maneuvers. He puts a corpse pile out to skew part of the field, hoping that his luck is going to be better for the next roll-off, which it's not. I get to choose deployment side, which I do, and I make him deploy first. I'm running an 8 activation list, so being able to deploy second allows me to place my last 2 deployments after he's put down his entire army. He goes with the safe bet of Ironmakers straight down the center, and I put Poor Fellows off towards the flank with the stakes, hoping that that'll protect them from a frontal charge. Rich puts Silence Men down, threatening the Poor Fellows and giving the Ironmakers a pretty heavy flank and hammer to go with their anvil. I put down Mountains Men down the center, hoping that I might be able to poke some panic damage through the heavy armor but low morale Ironmakers. Euron bows are going to go on the opposite side of the stakes, on one of the flank objectives, also trying to hide out since they're pretty squishy and not much better off than the Poor Fellows. I put Lannister crossbow between my 2 infantry units to try and give them a safe place where they can rain shots at the light armored enemy. Blacktyde Chosen with Dario are going to go on the far side to protect the Ironmaker's other flank. I'm going to put Greg near the wall because I know Gregor's going to be able to fit through those stakes and he can do some considerable damage to the low morale bowmen that are losing a wound every time they activate. Knights of Castle Rock go on the far flank to give them as much control over the all-infantry Greyjoys as I can give them. The round starts off by Qyburn taking letters, putting a panic token onto Euron. Rich is then going to take Asha and claim the Horse Zone, removing that token with her new upgraded ability, and he's going to use the horses to move Ironmakers up further towards the center to try and give them as much control over the center board as they can. Since that's more or less the crux of his entire army, they need to be able to exert as much pressure over the rest of the map as they can. After that, Peter Baelish is just going to take bags and do nothing with it because there's not much to do at this point in the game. Balon's going to get lucky, though, when he takes the crowns and take 3 off my crossbows, making me wish I had bags, but all I've got is Tommen with swords, who's going to claim it and do nothing. Rich uses as a pass token, since he's an activation down, he gets 2 of them. I activate my Poor Fellows, and I move them mostly up onto the point, just to make sure that they don't start getting shot by the NCU board next round. After that, Silence Men are going to march up. Being speed 6, they have a pretty considerable threat range. After that, Mountains Men are going to move up towards the center to put some threat on the Silence Men that are pretty far extended, but far enough away that if the Ironmakers do march up and try and get an early charge next round, they're not going to be able to claim the point and be exposed towards the Knights of Castle Rock. The Bowmen are going to go ahead and march up to exert some pressure over the Poor Fellows that are very lightly armored, and the Bowmen can safely shoot over those stakes, so the Poor Fellows are not in a good position. And you're going to see throughout this game that the poor fellows have been pretty horribly played. I'm quite embarrassed with everything that I've done using them. After that, I'm going to go ahead and move my crossbows up to try and put my own range pressure out. And Rich is going to use Raiding Call to do some Greyjoy shenanigans and get 2 pillage tokens onto his Ironmakers right off the start. 1 off of Euron's unit and 1 because he had the bags claimed. After that, I'm going to move Gregor in between my 2 infantry units, my crossbows and the poor fellows, to try and keep him safe and to keep him as a viable threat piece. He's got intimidating presence, which is pretty important as a support role to my mountains men, but even on his own, Gregor hits hard, and with a 2-up save, he's pretty tough to beat. Blacktyde Chosen are going to march up to try and keep Ironmaker's flank safe against the devastating Lance cavalry that I have. I'm still going to move them up pretty far towards his flank, using the low wall to deter him from charging me. If he does, he's going to have to deal with a pretty considerable Lannister supremacy, and since he doesn't have many pillage tokens out on anyone but Ironmakers and Soundsmen right now, that's a threat he's going to have to deal with. I'm hoping with my activation advantage, I can really leverage my Knights of Castle Rock to deal with some of his obnoxious, tanky units like the Ironmakers, which, to be honest, I probably should not engage at all. The round is going to start with Rich taking horses using Balon to move the Blacktyde Chosen and deny an easy flank for the Knights of Castle Rock. After that, I'm going to use Qyburn to take the swords and have my crossbows shoot the Soundsmen. I'm going to deal 4 wounds, 5 before the Dauntless, but he's just going to take Roderick's and use bags to put a pillage token on Blacktyde Chosen with first claim and heal his Soundsmen up 3. I'm then going to take Peter and use him on the crowns for Might of the Crowns to get my Mountains men charging in and engaged to the Ironmakers, trying to push through some damage with their panic rather than the armor, and I get lucky and I get a few wounds off of him. After that, he's going to activate Asha, and I'm going to do 2 things, Intrigue and Subterfuge and Qyburn targeting the 1 remaining zone. So Asha doesn't have any abilities, and if he claims that zone, I get to put out 2 vulnerable tokens, which he does do, so he can weaken the Knights of Castle Rock and 2 mark cards. After that, I'm going to maneuver my poor fellows, and he's going to use another pass token. I'm then going to shoot my crossbows into the Ironmakers. I take a wound on my own panic test with the Mountains men, but the Ironmakers take 2. He's going to use one of his Blacktyde resentments, and I'm going to successfully counterplot that. It's a pretty terrifying card, so I'm actually really happy to take a wound to make sure I can burn that off, even though I'd prefer not to take the wound at all. After that, Euron's going to use his own ability to put out a panic token at the cost of an additional wound, and then he's going to shoot my poor fellows. The panic token is not going to do anything for him, but he still gets to take 4 wounds off of me. My Knights of Castle Rock are just going to wiggle around and get put onto a back point, which is another mistake. I've made a lot of maneuvering mistakes at this point already, and I'm not going to realize that until later. After that, Finger Dance is going to get put onto the Ironmakers, and the Blacktyde Chosen are going to maneuver again to try and get a better place. I'm going to activate Gregor to try and stall out a little bit and gain tempo advantage on him, since I do still have activation advantage. I'll move Gregor to the other side of my poor fellows to threaten Euron and the bowmen, because after he takes a round of shots, Gregor could probably kill the bows. I horribly underestimate how aggressive Rich is willing to be, and he charges me over the stakes, which catches me off guard. Battle Scars really helps him out there, and he's able to bring the poor fellows down to just a couple of wounds, which quite honestly they didn't even deserve to be on. They probably should have died after that charge. My only chance of trying to save them now is to heal them with a fealty to the crown, so I need somebody to make a panic test. I activate my Mountains men and realign them to get them in range for the fealty to the crown. I don't do any damage off this attack, however, which is going to be the death sentence for my poor fellows. After that, Rich is going to activate, and he's going to play the Iron Price, which is going to heal him up 3 wounds that he'll be able to use to feed into Finger Dance. This is going to allow him to make a very strong standing attack into my Mountains men. Way more than I was hoping to, but this still kind of plays into my plan, so I'm hoping it'll turn out okay, because I've got Lannister supremacy to use after the attack. I take 5 wounds off of that, and then I play my Lannister supremacy, and I play Hear Me Roar out of my hand to try and skew the panic test and pop some extra damage through. He's going to Blacktyde Conviction, however, and pass that panic test, which is going to spell the end of my poor fellows. The round ends, we do our shots, and sure enough, the poor fellows die. Euron gets pretty lucky and makes a lot of saves, only taking 2 wounds, and my Knights of Castle Rock only take 1, which is going to bring us into the 3rd round with myself going first. I've made a lot of misplays, and even though I get to go first, I'm just going to be doing damage control this next round. Gregor is in certain death range in front of those soundsmen. My crossbowmen aren't looking that much better in front of the soundsmen either, and if I don't do something, those Ironmakers are going to use another finger dance attack, and they're just going to kill me. So, I need to figure out how to save as many of my units as possible. I threw away my Poor Fellows way earlier than I wanted to, and although Poor Fellows are alright to throw away because they are only a 4-point unit, I wasn't expecting it to do it like that, which is allowing him to slingshot into a better position. Round 3 starts, and I decide to use one of my 2 Peter Baelish tokens, so I can put him on swords, but instead use the bags to heal up my Mountains Men. I decide I can give up Gregor, he is still only 4 points, and I'll try and save the Mountains Men, because if I lose them, I lose the game. Gregor gets deleted, and the Soundsmen are going to move. Rich deliberates on his position a little bit, trying to figure out how close he wants to be, but realizing how fast they are, he decides he can play his Soundsmen as close to the point as he possibly can without being on it, but a pivot will be able to get him to take control of it. And then I'm going to activate Qyburn and put him onto bags to finish healing up the Mountainsmen. Rich activates Roderick, and I use a Qyburn token to target the letters and the crowns because I'm hoping to get at least one of those 2 zones. Rather than take the 2 vulnerable tokens, he uses that to put the Silencemen onto the point. I put Tommen onto the crowns, using ability to draw out Intrigue and Subterfuge from my discard pile and Bribery out of my deck, and I put a lot of damage into those Silencemen by replacing the crowns with some shots. After that, he's going to activate Asha to go for the letters that he originally wanted. I'm going to use Intrigue and Subterfuge. After that, I'm going to activate my crossbows, and I'm going to shoot the Soundsmen, hoping to kill them and try and regain some tempo. Rich does some classic Greyjoy nonsense and plays What is Dead May Never Die and Blacktyde Conviction because they failed the panic test after the shots, so they still would have died even with the What is Dead May Never Die. Instead, they're going to stick around to do the same as Poor Fellows and score and then die after being shot. Rich is going to activate Euron, who I hit with Subjugation of Power to take 3 wounds. So he doesn't actually take any damage when he moves them further onto the point, but he takes a full 3 off of it, so now they're in question of dying to shots as well, which is going to put a lot of pressure there, and I'm hoping I might be able to make up for those mistakes. I finally get the Knights of Castle Rock into the game, and I use the cavalry maneuver to move up closer to Dario's unit. I'm not going to have to run over the wall, but I am weakened. I declare the charge, and I'm going to get in on the Blacktyde Chosen, and I'm going to walk out of this one with 6 wounds, which is pretty good considering it's a weakened face charge. Rich is going to activate his Ironmakers after that, realign them on the attack, and use Kraken's Wrath to make a very big attack into my Mountains Men. I'm getting ready for a big hit, but I get really lucky and only take 2 wounds. I kind of regret losing Gregor now, but I play Seeing Their Flaws to token dump a vulnerable and a panic token onto the Ironmakers, and more importantly, when Kevan attacks them, that unit won't have any abilities. That'll let me cut through the +1 armor and the hardened and all sorts of nonsense, and I'll get a massive 6 wounds through on Baelor's attack, which I don't think Rich was expecting. He gets to play Blacktyde Resentment after that, which is going to make that unit extremely terrifying, and I'm going to play Fealty to the Crown. Failing the panic test allowed Kevan to heal those 2 wounds back up, so he stays at full, and I get to top off my crossbows. So if they do get flank charged by a Battle-Scar Soundsman, I am probably not going to get too devastated, and they might be able to stick around a little bit after that. The only thing after that is the Blacktyde Chosen, who are going to attack my Knights of Castle Rock. He's going to get a couple of wounds out. I'm going to play Lannister Supremacy, and he's going to pass the panic test, which is going to be a recurring theme for him and his army for the rest of the game. The round is over after that, and the flank shots go out onto the 2 side points. Euron barely survives with just 1 wound, which is almost as good as killing him, since if he takes an action, he'll take another wound, and the Silencemen, as they should, die. I've managed to take out the Silencemen at least once so far, so while I do have to worry about the Balon deployment, I'm pretty far from all of the flank edges, and Euron is really close to dead. The Blacktyde Chosen aren't that much better, and I got a ton of damage into the Ironmakers, so I'm actually feeling like I might be able to come back from this, despite some pretty egregious mistakes. Roderick token's going to get used at the start of the game, and I'm going to use my Peter once per game to take control of crowns. Iron Makers are going to make an attack and get a whole 8 wounds on through, with Asha onto the swords influencing the Iron Makers. I play Tommen on the bags and grab Intrigue and Subterfuge again, and my other bribery to thin out my deck a bit. Richard uses his second Roderick token and activates the Iron Makers. I'm going to use a Subjugation of Power on this that he's going to pass, and it's going to deal a couple of hits towards me. He's going to use Finger Dance to give himself rerolls and a vulnerable token, and he's going to punch another 5 wounds through on into me. So I'm glad I took the Tommen bags to stay alive at least this long. This is the kind of damage I've been expecting all game, and I am not as prepared for it as I thought, even though I've been expecting it. There are still a lot of NCU zones open, and he's got both of his We Do Not Sows somewhere in that deck of his. So I take Peter and use his second token, claiming the letters but replacing it with the Hordes effect. After that, Balon's going to activate, not take a zone, and redeploy the Silencemen. I'm going to then use Qyburn and put him onto the horses to move my crossbows away from the Silencemen. That way, even though they've been redeployed, it's going to take him around just to get back into the fight. Rich knows that I've got Intrigue and Subterfuge, but he doesn't care because Roderick is out of tokens, so he's going to activate Roderick, and I'm going to use Intrigue and Subterfuge anyway because controlling the bag, I get to put out a weakened token onto Dario, which is going to be pretty scary for him because those ones are going to do just as much damage, and those knights might be able to punch through Dario. I also use a Qyburn token to get out some vulnerable tokens, and Roderick, taking the crowns, tries to zap Kevan, who thankfully doesn't take any damage. After that, I activate the crossbows, and I shoot the Iron Makers and pop it to the last token. Silencemen are going to move on up onto that point now that the NCUs are basically all done, and I'll use Kevin's action to just maneuver him a little bit further away from the Iron Makers. I don't want to engage them since they still have it to the last token, and I'll basically just be signing my own death warrant if I put them back in. Blacktyde Chosen are going to attack and do a little bit of damage to the Knights of Castle Rock. I use Lannister's Supremacy, which, again, does nothing. The Knights of Castle Rock attack, on the other hand, does pretty good job for a standing attack, and I managed to make him fail that panic test, and I deal 5 wounds. After that, however, he's going to play Lash Out, and I'm going to take 4 wounds. That's going to hurt and set me back down to my last rank, which isn't where I was hoping they would be. I really need those Knights of Castle Rock if I want to try and come back into this game. But that's the round. Euron finally dies after scoring his point, and the Silencemen are going to take a pretty heavy amount of damage off that as well. So I'm hoping I might be able to pester them away with my crossbows. Being able to redeploy the Silencemen isn't actually that impactful in this game, so much as my own mistakes have put me into this position where the Iron Makers have a dominant effect in the center of the map, and Kevan is probably going to be dying very shortly. The only chance I've really got at getting back into this game is to get really lucky with some crossbow shots and to kill those Iron Makers before they can do much more, and then maybe I can kill Dario and come back into it from there. All in all, though, I'm really not that hopeful. I play a late Lannister pays his debts onto the Knights of Castle Rock, and I hope to get lucky putting Qyburn onto the swords to shoot the Iron Makers. With Hardened, though, and having 2 pillage tokens, they're pretty sturdy, and even with the vulnerable token, they're not going to take any wounds. That kind of seals my fate, and I'm really not feeling too confident, but I have one last trick up my sleeve. On Rich's activation, I'm going to play Predictable Maneuvers, since this is the only timing window that I've got for it, using it on Asha and the Iron Makers. He decides to charge with the Iron Makers anyway, so I get another crossbow shot, and I'm really hoping to get lucky, but again, 0 wounds, which I really should expect since there are 2 up saves and they're auto-block in the first 2. He managed to kill poor Kevin's Mountain's men, and from that point, he's just going to maneuver them, take up the center of the board, even though at this point, he's got the game in the bag. I play Peter, and I put him onto the letters, placing a panic token on Dario, and I draw my other Lannister pays his debts. Whoopee. I put it on my crossbows. After that, he's going to play Asha onto the bags to heal Baelor, now that he doesn't really care about the Blacktyde resentment much, and he just wants to make sure that he doesn't take a random wound to crowns or anything like that. He still has it to the last token, but better safe than sorry. I take Tommen, put him onto the crowns, replace it with another shot effect to deal a couple of wounds to the Silencemen. He is just going to shimmy his Silencemen around. There's really not much for them to do. And after that, the crossbows are going to shoot the Silencemen and deal a few more wounds. Blacktyde Chosen are going to activate and Rich is going to play Blessed with Stone, Blessed with Steel to heal up just enough that he's not going to die to any miraculous, unlucky string of ones, which I was really hoping he would do, but I've misplayed this game away. I definitely deserve to be in the position that I was. He gets actually pretty lucky with his deck, and instead lands a bunch of 6s that's going to deal a bunch of precision wounds, so I don't even get the chance to make the armor saves, which makes me nervous, but the Knights of Castle Rock don't adapt to this Dario attack, and after that, the game's over. Silence Men score up their point, and on the shots, Rich gets actually really lucky. He takes all 5 hits, but he manages to save all 5, because why wouldn't they? It didn't really make much of a difference, so we shake hands, we call it, and Rich wins the game. I misplayed the hell out of this game. I positioned my poor fellows extremely poorly. I positioned Gregor pretty poorly as well, and may have made the wrong call when I chose to sacrifice him to try and keep the Balance Men alive. But I think probably the biggest mistake, not even the Knights of Castle Rock being on the flank and waiting so long to get on into the fight, was engaging Baelor and the Ironmakers in the center of the field. That's a very easy mistake that a lot of new players make, and I really don't have much of an excuse to have fallen for it. I really should have driven the poor fellows down the center and just had them chew up the Ironmakers for a little bit, maybe even getting some lucky precision wounds through with their ability off of their faith, but that's not what happened. Rich won this game, and he deserved it, and I hope to never have to fight Greyjoys again. Dissecting my gameplay in this game, though, was one of the reasons why I started making battle reports. I was able to see a lot of mistakes, and not just the big ones while doing this, and I'm hoping that I never make mistakes this poorly again. Spoiler alert, if I do end up making a battle report of a game that Rich and I played at a tournament, you guys will see that I made much worse mistakes, and I definitely got punished for it that game. Thanks to everyone for tuning in for another Brotherhood of the Broken Banners battle report. Come on in next week for another one, and hopefully in the near future, we'll start producing other kinds of content that hopefully you guys will enjoy. Go ahead and comment any suggestions you guys have in the comments below, whether it be a list you'd like to see, a faction you'd like, or even just different kinds of videos or content that you guys think that we could make for everybody. We're happy to be whatever you guys want us to be. Take care and good luck on the battlefield.